Hello, my friends. The timing could not be more revealing. The World Economic Forum in Davos runs this week, 1923 January, and the European political class, those self-styled global managers who have spent the last year insisting they are the guardians of stability, arrive expecting to chase Washington for Project Ukraine. More security guarantees, more money, more weapons, more rhetorical reassurance that the Atlantic system still obeys their script. But the script has changed. Now they will be chasing Donald Trump for something far more humiliating, Greenland. The Europeans can pretend this is merely a misunderstanding inside NATO, a family argument that can be resolved quietly in backrooms. They can pretend it's about Arctic security and deterring Russia. They can insist that NATO can handle everything with a few quiet adjustments, some basing rights here, some joint planning there, some contracts for mineral extraction, a few symbolic troops doing exercises. They can keep insisting that this is not about territory, not about empire, not about vanity, not about rare earths, not about AI infrastructure, not about the future of power projection in the Arctic. They can say all of that. Trump is telling them, plainly, none of that matters. He wants possession. Legal and physical possession. And the first thing to understand, if you want to understand why this crisis is spiraling so fast, is that Trump's handling of it is not only strategic, it is personal. Over the last decade, and especially over the last year, Trump has developed something stronger than irritation toward the European leadership. Dislike is too mild. Contempt is closer. In some cases, it reads like genuine loathing. He does not respect these people. He believes they have tried to sabotage him at every turn. He believes they posture morally while living off American power. He senses weakness. He smells it the way a street fighter smells fear, and he enjoys making them feel it. You could already see this dynamic in that grotesque Scotland episode where European leaders congratulated themselves on managing Trump while accepting terms that exposed their subordinate position. The tariff and trade theatrics, the public grinning, the forced camaraderie, Europeans injecting wishful thinking into a relationship that has become fundamentally unequal. They told themselves they had a rapport. They told themselves the old rituals would restrain him. They told themselves there was always a compromise. They told themselves that if they talked to him the right way, he would behave like a conventional steward of the alliance. He doesn't even like them enough to pretend anymore. That is why the recent Trump messaging, the Truth Social posts, the letters, the deliberately theatrical threats is so important. It isn't just policy. It's a message: I can do this, and you cannot stop me. Take the infamous letter that circulated through European diplomatic channels in Washington, the one reportedly addressed to European ambassadors and meant to reach the Norwegian Prime Minister as well. The fact that a broadcaster got hold of it and published it is not a surprise. It was practically designed to leak. In Washington, if you circulate a letter like that to multiple actors, you are ensuring it becomes public. That is how the city works. The point was not discretion. The point was humiliation. And the letter itself, the way it ties Trump's Nobel grievance to Europe's current predicament, exposes something that European leaders still don't want to admit. Trump is not playing a tidy institutional game. He is blending personal grievance, spectacle, and leverage into a single coercive instrument. He is telling them, I pursued peace. I did things I can point to as peacemaking. And you didn't reward me with the validation I wanted, so now I'm done caring about your opinion. Now I'm focused narrowly on American interest, and I will take what I want. The Nobel episode is becoming more preposterous by the day. The Norwegians awarded their Peace Prize to Maria Machado, an absurd decision in itself, widely criticized, even criticized in the orbit of the Nobel tradition. Then she handed the medal to Trump. The Norwegians, we are told, are furious. But what did they expect? When you turn a Peace Prize into a political trinket, you can't act shocked when it is treated like a political trinket. And Trump's rage about the Nobel Prize is real, and it is rooted in something very specific. Barack Obama received the prize for doing nothing. The award was empty even then, but it mattered as a symbol. And Trump's resentment, especially his resentment toward Obama, has never cooled. So he wraps that grievance into an even larger message aimed at Europe. Your institutions are corrupt, your moral lecturing is fraudulent, your elites despise me, and I don't care. I will do what I want. Now, move from the theater to the substance. Greenland. The crucial point, one that the Europeans still pretend not to understand, is that Trump does not want a better arrangement. He does not want more American troops stationed there. The U.S. already has the right to operate in Greenland. He does not want a package of mineral extraction deals. Those are bargaining chips, not the end state. He does not want a complicated timetable of referendums and choices for Greenlanders between autonomy, independence, Denmark, or America. He does not want a carefully worded NATO framework that lets everyone save face. He wants Greenland, the territory inside the United States. When he says he is ready to negotiate, he does not mean, let's explore options. He means, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. We can negotiate the mechanism, purchase, treaty, pressure campaign, whatever, but the destination is fixed. Greenland becomes American. And the reason Davos will not change this is simple. Trump has gone too far publicly to reverse without looking weak. His rhetoric has reached the point where backing down would invite ridicule in the very political culture he thrives in. You can imagine the headlines. Trump folds on Greenland. Trump blinks. Trump humiliated by Europeans. He will not accept that. If he is going to be persuaded to pause, it will only be a tactical pause, and then he will return to the demand days or weeks later. Because Greenland, like tariffs, is one of those fixed points in Trump's mind. People forget that in 2019, Trump raised Greenland directly. He was mocked. Europe shrugged. Nobody built a serious European strategy around it. And that failure falls squarely on the people who posture as Europe's serious leadership. If Ursula von der Leyen had been even remotely competent as the political manager she pretends to be, she would have treated 2019 as an alarm bell. She would have assembled a team. She would have forced Denmark to confront the issue early. She would have created political and legal conditions that made a future American bid more costly. She would have moved preemptively. Instead, Europe did what it always does now. It obsessed about Ukraine. Everything for the European political class becomes Project Ukraine. Ukraine is not even in the EU. It is not an EU member state. But for 4 years, and with near total intensity for the last year, the European leadership has behaved as though Europe exists for one purpose: to sustain a sanctions-driven proxy war agenda and undeclared war of attrition against Russia while pretending it is a moral crusade. They didn't address Greenland. They didn't address inflation. They didn't address German deindustrialization. They didn't address Nord Stream in any coherent way beyond propaganda and repression. They didn't address their technological decline. Their economic policy became an extension of sanctions policy. Their diplomacy became a traveling lecture circuit demanding that India, China, the Gulf, Africa, everyone align with Europe's hostility to Russia. It became an obsession, and obsessions devour those who hold them. You see it in everything. Why is Germany deindustrializing? Because Europe chose sanctions and energy rupture as a substitute for strategic thinking. Why is international trade in chaos? Because Europe weaponized commerce in the name of its Russia fixation and then acted shocked when the world stopped treating Europe as a stable partner. Why are relations with China strained? Because Europe sacrificed its modernization to please Washington's paranoia. Why do European diplomats show up in Beijing or Delhi and talk endlessly about Ukraine and sanctions? Because they have nothing else left, no imagination, no independent agenda, no real leverage. And now, as the price of that obsession comes due, they discover they have no cards to play in a confrontation with the United States. Denmark is a perfect case study. If Denmark had leadership worthy of the name, it would have made one move years ago, one move that would have dramatically complicated Trump's agenda, a referendum in Greenland. Give Greenlanders a real vote on their future status. Put the outcome into the international record. Then if Trump comes demanding annexation, Denmark can say, the people have spoken. The legitimacy question is settled. Any American move now becomes blatantly coercive and openly imperial, with a clear democratic counter-argument already established. That would have been checkmate in the diplomatic sense. Denmark did nothing. Instead, the Danish leadership poured political capital into Zelensky photo ops, personal friendships, documentaries, symbolism, anything but strategic preparation. Now, Denmark faces the very real possibility of being remembered as the government that lost Greenland. And once the crisis hit, Europe's response was the most pathetic kind of improvisation. Dispatch a tiny force, 5, 10, 20, 50 people to Greenland, without clarity of purpose. Is this force meant to deter Russia, which has no interest in invading Greenland? Is it meant to deter the United States, which has vastly superior power and bases and logistics? Is it meant to signal resolve to Trump, the very man most likely to interpret it as an insult and a provocation? Of course it angered him. It was all but guaranteed to anger him. And then you get the ridiculous post hoc excuses. Oh, it wasn't aimed at America, it was an exercise against Russia. Give me a break. Everyone knows what it was. A symbolic gesture of defiance designed for European domestic audiences, not a serious strategic posture. Now, look at the American side. There is criticism in the U.S., yes. There is pushback in media circles, yes. There are some politicians unhappy, yes. But what is striking is the lack of the kind of institutional revolt you would expect if America were truly recoiling from this policy. Where is the overwhelming bipartisan congressional condemnation? Where is the united political front saying, this is unacceptable, the cannot behave this way. It isn't there. That tells you something important. There is a strategic logic inside the American system that supports Trump's Greenland move, even if not everyone supports it. People like to pretend this is only Trump's vanity. Vanity is absolutely part of it. Trump is Trump, but it is not the whole story. There is a hemispheric doctrine forming in Washington. Secure the Western Hemisphere, secure the Arctic approach, build a protected base area from which to project power, especially as Washington pivots toward long-term competition with China. Greenland fits into that scheme. Missile defense fantasies, golden domes, hypersonic interception, forward sensors, Greenland fits. Resource access, rare earths, minerals, strategic supply chains, Greenland fits. Prestige and legacy, bigger than the Louisiana Purchase rhetoric, Greenland fits. And that combination creates enough internal American support to make this a viable policy. And Europeans who are clinging to the fantasy that American opposition will stop it are deluding themselves. Now, Europe's so-called countermeasures, you hear talk of the EU activating the anti-coercion instrument. You hear talk of retaliatory tariffs, packages of $93 billion in trade retaliation. You hear talk of tearing up agreements. You even hear occasional talk of restricting U.S. bases. It is mostly phony. The Europeans cannot sustain a long-term quarrel with the United States, especially not the countries at the sharp edge of their own Russia paranoia. The Baltics, Poland, Finland, Sweden. These states have chained their security identities to American protection. They have burned bridges with Russia. They have contributed to the catastrophe of European-Russian relations. They have done it with zeal. And now they are structurally incapable of pivoting, because to pivot would be to admit their policy was suicidal and their fear narrative was politically weaponized. So imagine, hypothetically, that Europe did something dramatic like restricting American bases. Even if it happened, and it won't, the outcome is obvious. Within weeks or months, individual European states would cut side deals with Washington to restore U.S. military presence on their own soil. Poland would, the Baltics would, others would follow. Europe would fragment instantly, because the Europeans have created a relationship with America that is not partnership, it is dependence. And dependence means you can posture, but you cannot fight. The deeper trap is energy. Trump holds an energy weapon over Europe that Europe handed him with both hands, LNG. Europe cut itself off from cheap Russian pipeline gas. Then it moved to curtail Russian LNG as well, an almost comically self-destructive decision at a time when European competitiveness is collapsing. Now Europe relies heavily on U.S. LNG. That dependence is existential for Europe and merely profitable, painful, but manageable for the United States. Some argue, if Trump cuts LNG, U.S. companies lose profits. That is not an existential problem for America. If Washington wants, it can subsidize, it can redirect, it can absorb, it can do QE. It can use the power of the dollar system. For Europe, a sudden LNG squeeze risks something beyond deindustrialization. It risks industrial collapse, especially in winter conditions. And what are Europe's alternatives? Pipeline gas from Russia is gone. Could Europe beg Moscow to turn it back on? Why would Russia trust Europe again? Why would Moscow accept a return to the old relationship after Europe proved itself an unreliable, hostile, politically captured market? If Russia were even willing, the bargain would be humiliating beyond imagination, and the Europeans know it. LNG from Qatar. Qatar is tied to the U.S. security umbrella. In a serious U.S.-EU quarrel, Qatar will not override Washington to save Europe. Anyone who understands Gulf monarchies understands that reality immediately. Qatar will not rescue Europe from America. So when Europeans threaten economic war, they are threatening a war they cannot survive. And this is why the only rational card Europe could play, if it were serious about escaping the trap, is the one it will not play. Reopen channels to Moscow to restore some balance in its strategic posture. Not necessarily to choose Russia over America, but to stop being a vassal with no options. In theory, Europe could send a figure who still maintains bridges, someone like Viktor Orban, to Moscow and Washington. Europe could say, we accept the minimum framework that was on the table in June 2024. Tell us what more you require. Let us rebuild energy and trade access. Let us begin re-entering the multipolar world without pretending it is a crime. Then Europe could approach Washington with a slightly less desperate posture and say, we can't be squeezed indefinitely. Help us save face on Greenland. Don't come back for more. That would be strategy. Europe will not do it. The hardliners inside the EU, the Baltic bloc with outsized influence, the Scandinavians now trapped in their own Russia anxiety. The British determined to keep Project Ukraine alive at all costs will block any serious pivot. They will say, if we talk to Moscow to gain leverage against Washington, Washington will accuse us of choosing Russia. We cannot afford that. And because they have burned their bridges so thoroughly, they are right about the immediate risk. So Europe will do what dependent systems always do. It will rage, posture, threaten, and then comply. That is the only plausible endpoint. They will negotiate. They will haggle over price. They will float absurd numbers 700 billion, 800 billion because fantasy is a coping mechanism. But Trump has all the cards. He will decide the terms. The final price, if money is even the core element, will likely be token compared to the numbers being shouted. And yes, in the most grotesque aspect of the entire affair, it will mean the sale of Greenland, including the people. Because great powers treat small populations as inventory when the system is this cynical. Could Davos produce a temporary softening? Possibly. Trump is erratic. He can announce a pause, accept a flattering narrative, claim victory, and then return to the demand a week later. But I do not expect a real reversal. Greenland and tariffs are not flexible issues for Trump. They are part of how he imagines his legacy. He wants to be remembered as the president who expanded America's territory on the scale of Jefferson and the Louisiana Purchase, perhaps even in the sequence American mythology loves. Jefferson in Louisiana, Seward in Alaska, Trump in Greenland. And the Russians understand this psychology far better than the Europeans do. Moscow has no need for Greenland. Moscow has no aggressive intention toward it. But Moscow sees the pieces falling and uses the fall to its advantage. Russian messaging in foreign language outlets has been clever. Flattering Trump, whispering the myth of historic greatness, pointing out that if he secures Greenland he will be remembered as a giant. Putin's spokesman has repeated versions of that sentiment. Russian officials and commentators mock Europe's daddy humiliations and the way European leaders debase themselves to stay close to Washington. They rub salt in the wound because it costs them nothing and weakens their adversaries. And while Europe panics about Trump taking Greenland, Trump is simultaneously doing something else that enrages Europe. He is opening doors to Russia, invitations to Putin to sit on some grand peace board, meetings between U.S. operatives and Russian financial figures. The suggestion of direct contacts, whatever the practical outcome, the symbolism is unmistakable. Europe wanted Russia isolated and treated as untouchable. Instead, Trump signals, I will deal with Putin if it suits me, and I don't need European permission. That is why Kaja Kallas's reflexive answer to Greenland, Russia, and China will be happy is so revealing and so pathetic. Europe's own territory is being pressured, and the European response is, think of how Putin will enjoy this. It is a confession that Europe's mental universe has collapsed into a single obsession. Even when America comes for a European possession, Europe still thinks primarily about Russia. That is not strategic. That is psychological captivity. Now, one more layer that Europeans refuse to speak about openly because it would expose how weak they really are, is the technological dimension. European leaders avoid talking about AI, minerals, platforms, and technological sovereignty because the moment they speak about it honestly, they would be forced to admit the scale of Europe's decline. The U.S. is not only Europe's security umbrella, it is Europe's technological ecosystem. Europe runs on American social media platforms. Europe runs on American cloud structures. Europe runs on American tech stack assumptions. If Europe ever truly tried to punish America by restricting platforms, America could switch them off or at minimum cripple the infrastructure, and Europe has no rapid ability to replace them. No viable time frame, no independent ecosystem ready to take over. Europe's position relative to external powers is approaching a level of weakness it has not experienced since the collapse of imperial structures centuries ago. It has little hard power. Its soft power has been squandered by moral hectoring and a single-minded Russia fixation that alienates much of the world. It has energy dependence, it has technological dependence, it has financial fragility, and it has leadership that confuses slogans with strategy. So when Trump's people say, you did nothing with Greenland, it lands because it is true. Europe did nothing not only with Greenland, but with the underlying conditions that made Greenland an easy target for American coercion. And that is why the outcome is already visible. Europe will chase Trump around Davos like anxious schoolchildren chasing a headmaster trying to extract reassurance while pretending they have dignity. The rituals will be humiliating. The statements will be grand. The threats will be theatrical. The anti-coercion talk will be loud. Then Europe will give Trump what he wants. Maybe it comes through a purchase. Maybe it comes through a legal instrument disguised as a partnership. Maybe it comes through a staged referendum, shaped by pressure, money, and propaganda. Maybe it comes through a treaty where Denmark agrees under economic duress. The mechanism will be engineered for face-saving. But the end state will be the same, Greenland under American sovereignty in substance, and eventually on paper. And the Europeans will tell themselves it was necessary, that it was managed, that it was preventing worse outcomes. They will rationalize it the way dependent systems always rationalize: submission. Meanwhile, Russia will continue doing what it has done throughout this entire era, watching Western contradictions eat the West from within, applying pressure where it matters, refusing to be baited into foolish distractions, and exploiting the strategic incompetence of adversaries who confuse obsession with policy. We are entering a week of spectacle in Davos. But beneath the spectacle is a harsh reality. Europe is learning, in real time, what it means to have no sovereignty in the presence of a power that no longer bothers to hide its contempt. And Europe has only itself to blame.